Good morning, Dumelang, Sanbonani, Namaskar. Welcome to Minister Prabhu and his delegation to South Africa. He's been here many times. He's even been to my hometown. So, Premier, you and I are competing, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. My colleagues, Ministers Davies and Zulu, the Premier of Gauteng, the High Commissioner, our colleagues from SACU and SADC, and members of the business community represented here today. I'm just a supporting act. Our Indian colleagues represent Bollywood. I'm just a supporting actor to my colleague, Minister Davies. But as Mr. Maseko correctly reminded us, we meet in the embrace, if you like, of Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. An embrace which tells us about the kind of values and actions that they stood for. And the question, of course, that the current generation is faced with is how do we represent those values and actions in today's very complex 21st century? It's nice to proclaim the heritage that we both have as Indian citizens and South African citizens. The real challenge for us, whether in business or in government, is how to play out that heritage in today's terms. The kind of humanity and human rights that they fought for, the freedom for each of our countries that they both represented and sacrificed so much for, and the kind of community of nations that they believed in and throughout their lives represented, whether it was in the trading sector, in the cultural sector, in the spiritual sector, or just in respect of global peace and relations as well. Today, South Africa and India share many common platforms. The BRICS formation, which meets later this year in South Africa in the form of its summit, where all the leaders of the BRICS countries will be represented once again at the summit. The G20, which is another arena in which India and South Africa have cooperated. And our two ministers, Prabhu and Davies, represent us in the World Trade Organization and have developed a lot of common ground in respect of the kind of issues that they are confronted with. But over and above the transactional level in which all of us will be concerned about for the next 24 to 48 hours, in other words, what deal can I make with whom, if I can put it in simple terms, we need to just raise the bar a little bit as India and South Africa as well, particularly if we proclaim to be the children of Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. Because we've got to ask ourselves, what will inclusive growth mean for our small 55 million population, but India's 1.3 billion population, and indeed probably 6 billion people who stand marginalized in most economies and countries of the world. Inequality remains a challenge both in the Western world or the developed world and in our own country. Business confidence has certainly been increasing in recent times, with the IMF saying that growth is pursuing a greater path. India's numbers, Mr. Prabhu, if one of the things you could export to us is your GDP numbers, then we would at least numbers-wise look a little bit better. But in South Africa, as we know, ladies and gentlemen, as President Ramaphosa has declared, we do indeed have a new dawn. And I'll come back to that. But that new dawn has created an immense new spirit in the country and confidence in the business community, which I hope will be reflected in the talks that we have going on today. It's also increased the level of public trust, which in many countries of the world is declining between business and government elites on the one hand and citizens on the other hand. And as the elite here, both political and business, we have to not only, as I said, transact on that which we have to, but also raise the bar and ask ourselves, what is it that we can do to increase the public's confidence in ourselves? And that confidence will only be increased, as Amartya Sen says, not by fancy models and formulae, but by the actual experience people have of the difference that growth and investment actually makes in their lives. So if people without water get water, if people without shelter get shelter, if young people without hope and jobs get more hope and jobs, then we are beginning to make a difference in the lives of people and earn their confidence as well. And in that sense, we share the quest for more jobs for all of our citizens, for a new set of skills, as Mr. Maseko and others were pointing out, to the newer generations of young people that are growing up in society, because clearly yesterday's skills are not good enough for tomorrow. And how we prepare our young people for tomorrow is probably the greatest challenge that our generation has. How do we also contribute to sustainable growth in the broadest sense of the word and meet the sustainable development goals that the world has set for itself is a crucial challenge as well. One of the conversations that is happening at a global level, including in quarters such as the World Bank and the IMF, is how do we ensure that the benefits that accrue from these GDP and other numbers that we often refer to are benefits that are also accruing to what we would call ordinary citizens in our society. And that's one of the big challenges that globalization in its current form presents for all of us. So yes, it's done a fantastic amount to increase trade, to spread technology. I don't tweet, I'm sure many of you do, and enabled us to communicate with that. But one of the morning newspapers today warns us about tweets as well. A study done by MIT shows that 75% of the information contained in these tweets is false. So welcome to the era of fake news as well. But we live in the real time, and this is not fake news. This conference is actually happening. The High Commissioner, when she approached me, said that India and South Africa need to open a new chapter in our lives. And as President Ramaphosa said, that this new dawn must mean that citizens benefit, as I said, from what government does and what the private sector does. But more importantly, the institutions of government, and in particular in this instance, in my instance and the instance of my colleagues, state-owned enterprises need to move in a very different direction from the past era of what we call state capture in South Africa. And so as we look at the opportunities and you look at what kind of enterprises you combine your efforts in, let's also remind ourselves that the current global situation itself poses a number of risks that we as BRICS-related countries have the possibility of both mitigating on the one hand and contributing to developing a new direction on the other hand. The risks are that we might yet have another financial crisis, although we think we've just recovered from the 2008, 2009 crisis. The risk is that trade as we know it in the multilateral era through the work done at the WTO might not be the kind of trade that we would see in 2 or 3 years' time, given the kind of tweets that emerge from different parts of the world. You're not laughing at that one. And similarly, whilst technology is playing an important part, serious questions are being raised about big data and artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution, and whether as countries and as people, we are ready and able to cope with the kind of changes that they will actually demand. So with respect, I would suggest that business leaders today not only need to look at the transactional level, which I'm sure many of us will do today, but also begin to throw up the new Mandelas and the new Mahatma Gandhis in the 21st century, who will say to us that there's a new way in which economies can grow in a more sustainable and inclusive way. We found new ways in which to decrease inequality and poverty in our countries. And as we do so, let's reinforce the multilateral nature of the global relations that we've actually had, ensure that more trade happens, including the localization that Mr. Agarwal was speaking of earlier on, and ensure that the gap between rich and poor is in fact narrowed as well. So the opportunities exist for us. I see the CEO of SAA here, to once again establish the Joburg-Mumbai or Joburg-Delhi linkage. I'm not sure who stands accused of giving it up in the first place, but we'll discover that sooner or later. Secondly, there's a lot of room for us to learn from one another in respect of better governance, but more importantly, more effective business models as far as state-owned enterprises are concerned. And Mr. Prabhu here represents a person who turned the Indian railways around, so perhaps he can share that experience with us and teach us a thing or two as well. And as has been pointed out, technology, IT, skills training, over and above the normal commerce and imports and exports are all areas that we could capitalize on. And finally, let me congratulate Mr. Agarwal on making Mr. Ramaphosa's 100 billion target now 99 billion. Thank you very much.